While the ongoing pandemic has posed huge challenges for us at PVPA to stay connected as a community of students and artists, our becoming familiar with how to do that while not together physically has actually opened doors. The Visual Art and Technical Theater Department has taken this opportunity to reach out to a network of artists that extends far beyond our region. Each week we'll be talking with a different artist who will share stories of their path to and through the arts. And in doing this, our students will get a chance to see where the work that we do at PVPA might lead them in the future.
My name is Jamie Lundell. I'm a blacksmith, bladesmith, and I've been doing this, working with metal for 20 years now. Um, it's funny that you state that you said that it seems kind of like this magical mythical thing. When I was your age, I had no idea that this could be a possible career path for me. If I had known, if I had seen people out here kind of like doing these things, I might have been like, oh yeah, maybe I could make that happen, because I was very much into medieval things and Dungeons and Dragons and fantasy novels and all that stuff, and I just never knew that this was like a possibility for me to do. And it took me experimenting and finding different creative outlets to kind of finally get to where I finally ended up becoming a bladesmith. And really, what what ended up happening for me is I was in college. I was It was over one summer. I was living in Boston, and I took a class in fine metalworking. So I was working with like silver and brass and copper and all that stuff, on a very small scale. And once I started making things out of metal, it was, the permanence of those items, really resonated with me. Because I had done some drawing and some painting and some sculpting and kind of like dabbled in all these different things. I also was really into like creative writing, because like I said, I was very into like fantasy novels and things of that nature. And that's what I thought I was going to go to college for. I thought I was going to go to college to be a creative writer. But once I started working with metal, it was just, I just fell in love with it. And I ended up finding a blacksmith, not too far away from where I live, that I started working with over my breaks. And that was what got me into to actually like blacksmithing and bladesmithing. And it was a really interesting journey. And one thing that I'm going to bring up now, because it was very pertinent at this point in my life, was that when you're when I was at school, in college, and I had found Peter, who I ended up apprenticing with. I then went to my school and I found grants and in different ways that I could get funding, to go ahead and you know have some money flow during like my summer, so I didn't have to go home and like work at back at that then, my job was at Hollywood Video. You got video stores, that's a thing of the past, right? But that's where I would spend my summers working, doing stuff like that. And getting those grants and having access to that money allowed me to kind of just concentrate on my art and on the blacksmithing and bladesmithing stuff. So the point of that is that if you do choose to go to school, go to college, that there's often all sorts of money that's available there for you if you go and look for it and apply for it. You're never guaranteed to get any of it, but for me, it was a thing that worked out. And once I started, every break I would apply for grants, and I would get grants to kind of fund me in pursuing the thing that I loved. So it's an important thing to think about, if you do, like I said, decide to go to college, or higher education of that sort, is that there's all sorts of money out there that will help you kind of pursue the things that you love. Um, so, anyways, once I got into metalworking, it was just super exciting for me, and it's exciting in so many levels. Um, with metalworking, there's such a physical aspect to it, that I really enjoyed, because you're working with this heat. You have like a 2,000-degree forge, and you're pulling steel out and hammering on it, um, and that really appeals to me. But also, there's a lot of other facets to it. It's not just like hitting things with hammers. There's a lot of like math involved. You need to know that you have enough material in the thing that you're starting with, that you can make the shape that you want. And it's kind of like working with really, really hot Play-Doh, right? And you gotta move it with hammers, but it's like squishing the material out this way and out that way in order to create these different shapes. Um, it's just a really, on so many different levels, like so many, like a physical level and like a cerebral level. You got to do your math, you got to do your science, as to like what kind of how the metal is going to work, and when you're heat treating it, are you heat treating it the right way? Because all metals are different depending on the types of alloys that go into them. There's a lot of different elements to it, and I find that no matter how much I feel like I know about one part of metalworking, there's always more avenues to go down. There's always more things to learn. Um, so there's never a lack of new things to do, let alone just getting good at that one thing. Um, Whether it be forging, or patterning in steel, or different types of getting into doing castings and things like that. So you need to sculpt your wax, and then you invest it and cast it in bronze or silver or whatever it is, and how do you apply that to your sword? And um, you know anyways, there's a lot of different things about it that I found to just be incredibly um, exciting and interesting. Um, you know, one other point that I think is good to make is that when I started out with this, it was definitely like not an easy thing to pursue, um, and there had to be like other things going on, as far as like ways to make money before I could finally shift the gears to just doing this as my sole career. And part of that was like finding something that's adjacent to the thing. So we did a lot of, like, in the beginning, we were doing, because I own the business with, we started it with two other individuals. And so what we would do is we'd make custom railings and things of that, like gates and stuff like that. And that was a thing that was adjacent to what we wanted to do. It used kind of like all the same tools, but wasn't really the thing that like I wasn't super excited to like forge out 120 pickets. I'd rather make a sword. But you got to do what you got to do in order to pay the bills, in order you can finally get to the place where you get to just make all sorts of really interesting, exciting swords and knives and things of that nature. And
Jamie,
Go
I
on.
was going to actually ask if you wouldn't mind backing up a tiny bit, right? Knowing that we're talking to students as young as seventh graders, I imagine that the first artistic creation of yours was not pounding a piece of hot metal, and so I'm curious about like where your sort of initial visual art explorations began, and then how did those inform what you're doing now?
Sure. So for I mean, as long as I could remember, I would always like doodling and things of that nature. I got into pottery for a while I was in high school. That was a lot of fun, and that really helped um, with that idea of proportionality, do I have enough material in this ball of clay to squish out and make the thing that I want? um, and you know I did a fair amount of drawing. I was never really great at at two-dimensional art. It was never really a thing that I excelled greatly at. I like passable um, with my drawing, and really not great with painting. Sculpture stuff was pretty good, but I think that part of it was really a desire to just create things. Like I always felt good about making things, and I always wanted to make like more kind of like medievally things. And so I guess one thing when I was in high school, I was really into to like live action role playing, and so I would make these elaborate foam and duct tape swords and things like that. And so I guess that's kind of like the beginning of it all, right? I mean, like, cause that was really where like my passion was. And, for all you guys into like, theater stuff, um, really like, in high school, uh, I would, um, I would spend all of my time that wasn't working on school stuff, or I was also very much into track and field. So if I wasn't doing either of those things, I was making those like foam and duct tape swords that I was telling you about, or I was sewing different like medieval kind of clothing, or I was writing plots and adventures to send my friends on, and I would go out into the woods and build different structures and stuff in the woods, and then you know and so I'd invite all my friends over and be like, oh well, like, here's some costumes, and I made up this whole system, this elaborate game system that we can play, and then send my friends on adventures in the woods. Yeah, so that was me in high school.
You're reminding me of, I mean, two of our earlier guests have said very similar things to what you're saying now, that embrace your weird. Like you never know how the bizarre interests that you have as a young person wind up feeding your career. Like we had a 3D sculptor who and 3D printer who was talking about how much he learned by painting his little Warhammer figures, right? So it's like, all the little things we geek out about can like totally inform our art. So anyway, just uh,
Oh, no, absolutely. Well, and to a very good point on that, I mean, one thing that is really important about creating things is to find the thing that inspires you, and then to see the other people that are doing that thing and be inspired by those people, right? So if your previous guest on here was um, got into 3D printing and all that stuff. And so a lot of that is down to like that little like the little details are the things that make that really interesting. And what allows you to see those little details is spending all the time looking through the magnifying glass at those little figures and painting all the little rivets, and like, because once all those rivets are painted, all of a sudden it goes from being kind of cool to being really amazing, right? So uh yeah, finding what you like, and then exploring what people are doing what the people that are creating the things that you like are doing, and letting that inform, kind of be a springboard for you to kind of embrace that interest and that enthusiasm, and do something like that. But always making sure that you're kind of doing it in your own, in your own way,
Yeah.
because that's always, it's trying to find your voice, in the larger voice of other people. When especially you get into like a specific style of painting or whatever, it's easy to try to kind of just like emulate one thing, um, and maybe get a little bit lost in that. It's hard to find your own niche in there, I guess, if that makes sense. But it's important to explore all of those things. Anyways, I feel like I'm kind of rambling.
Well, no, that was great. And with talking about your niche, right? You were just, I kind of derailed you when you were talking about the transition point from what you needed to do to pay the bills,
Hmm.
and that was in line with your interest, but not precisely. So I'd love if you could share a little bit more about the story of how you managed to weed those other things out so that you can focus solely on what you love.
Yeah. So really what it came down to is that, we had this very successful, ironwork business. And from there, I decided I wanted to try to do, for a while, I wanted to do everything, you know, and I wanted, so I was making armor, and I was making jewelry, and I was doing castings, and I was making swords, and I was, making, railings, and I was even apprenticed to a farrier for 4 years. So I was doing horseshoeing, which is brutal work. Pays really well, but it's brutal work. Um, and But what ended up happening, really, you know, I the real transition came when I heard about Forged in Fire. And we had been doing a little bit of all these different things, as we went on, and then Forged in Fire came around, and I was asked to be on an episode in the first season, and I was really nervous about it. To be honest, it was, because it was a complete unknown. Having, being that there weren't any seasons out there that you could go and watch and be like, oh yeah, this is how it goes, and this is how they treat the Smiths on the show. You sign this waiver, or this contract that basically says that they can, defame you in any way they want, and you have no legal recourse. And it was like crazy when you're reading it and signing it, and you're like, I guess we're going to do this. And anyways, and that show, really, what it did for me was, it opened up uh, an amount of people to be aware of the work that I'm doing, and beyond that, it brought for the custom sword and knife, um, uh, you know, I guess, culture in the United States. It really breathed life into that, because now all of a sudden people are watching it on TV and getting excited about it. And so there was, so that really, that was the thing that really kind of catapulted me from kind of doing all of these different things to being able to kind of focus down and just do the one thing. And as a kind of a note on that, there are certain times that in your life that you'll like have a choice to kind of like take a small risk, right? Because that's what I saw this as, is like, I mean, I didn't have a lot to lose, because it's not like many people were like buying swords from me and things like that at that point. Not that it didn't happen, but it was, pretty sporadic. Um, And I took that chance. And then when I was there, and I ended up getting to the finals, to the final round, and I was talking with Peter, who was my mentor, um, and about, I had to make a Roman gladius, and so it was like, well, how do I want to go about doing this? And one thing that that he said to me was like, you gotta, if you want to, what kind of work do you want to do in the future, because this is the time that you can make a thing and put it out there, so that, and then people are going to know that you do that, right? So I had an opportunity, and I ended up making a Damascus sword for that. And it was actually only the third piece of Damascus that I made, was the piece for that show. um, and and which is crazy to think about, because that was like 6 years ago. I think it was 6 years ago, which is really a crazy thing to think about. But from there, like, I rarely make things that are not Damascus. And so, and what that is you taking layers of different steels, right? You'll have one that has like a high nickel or chrome content. Nickel and chrome help resist oxides and rust, and so you layer that with a high carbon steel, and then you create patterns within the metal. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. I don't know if, how much you want me to get into all of the theories of creating those patterns, but again, that falls into a lot of that math and a lot of that chemistry that I was talking about earlier. If you don't know what's in the steel, you don't know the characteristics. If you don't put the two steels that are going to heat treat similarly together, they'll break apart, because one is going to expand more than the other during the heat treat, and now you have your welds fracturing. And so that's another place where science comes in. Also, just a quick science note on when I was on Forged in Fire, the thing that we had to in the beginning, our challenge was we had a 2-inch ball bearing, and we had to forge that out into a knife. And now, so the thing about that is having that knowledge of science really came into play there, because the ball bearing was made of 52-100, which is a steel which is very high chromium and a really high carbon. And so you get chromium carbide. I'm going crazy here, but so the chromium carbide is like a really hard thing that forms inside the steel, right? And if you don't break that down before you start forging it, you're gonna create cracks in your material. It's going to start separating along the boundaries of those carbides. So and chromium carbide doesn't break down until 1500 degrees. So and it's not the outside, it's the inside of that 2-inch sphere that you need to make sure is at 1500 degrees, and for an extended period of time, because if you don't let it soak. Anyways, the point of the matter is I knew that, and I was the only person on my episode. Well, no, one other guy didn't have a crack in his blade, but so that knowledge of science is important, and that kind of yeah, and that's one of the things that I absolutely love about this craft, is that there's so many things to think about, and so many aha moments, and you usually get to those aha moments by breaking something. Like something goes terribly wrong, and then you're like, why did this happen? And then you're like, oh yeah, no, well, that makes sense. So,
There's a great, there's an awesome saying that I love. Good judgment is a product of experience. Experience is a product of bad judgment. So, Jamie, we have there's a student who would like to ask a question of you.
Yeah, so so you can make a perfectly fine sword doing the cut and grind method that you're mentioning. And so what will usually happen in that scenario is those swords that's generally done for swords that are being mass produced, or at least a run of swords being made. So you'll have a sheet of steel and laser cut the profile, and then on a CNC laser machine. And then you can also, then from there you can either hand grind it or CNC mill the surfaces down. I don't have I don't have experience doing making anything really in that nature. I have done some cut and grind in a way of having a bar that I then cut a profile out of, by hand, not laser cutting. So it's like basically the same thing. And then like taking that blank and then just grinding it. I've done that a few times. It's not my preferred method to work. Really, I've fallen really deeply down into the well of creating Damascus, and so doing all that patterning, um, and I do all of that by hand. I have a bunch of tools to assist me. This might be a great time to take a look at a video.
A quick tour of the forging area. We have 110-pound power hammer, 28-ton hydraulic press, 450-pound power hammer, an assortment of anvils and vices and hammers. There's a small 50-pound power hammer. There's a couple of different forges, and another smaller hydraulic press over there. It's a 12-ton. And like I said, several different anvils and hammers to get other work done. We also have a pretty well set up machining area. So we have a milling machine here. This is a pentagraph, which will copy an image, so like an old school machine that will allow you to copy images and change their sizes. We have a small South Bend lathe, and then we have a pretty monstrous turret lathe over here. And also a bunch of drill presses. And then I guess in the background, you can see we have a bunch of kilns for doing heat treating. For doing our grinding, we have 6 different grinders set up. They have different attachments on them. So we have different size wheels, so we can do different radiuses. Some of them have vacuums hooked up to collect dust when we're working on wood. And we have a whole assortment of different shapes that we can do our grinding on and attach to our grinders.
Yeah, so that was just a really quick overview of some of the tools that we have in the shop. There's a bit more to the shop than that. One of the reasons that we have so many grinders set up is because we had been doing a lot of classes. We're doing quite a few, almost every weekend we were hosting classes at the shop, but current scenario makes that not such a viable thing, but we're really trying to set up a school kind of setup there. Anyways, let me think here. So under those hammers, the really interesting thing is that some of the tools can be just like these ancient things, right? I mean, I guess, ancient has different meanings, but that large power hammer there, that was built in 1914. So it's over 100 years old. Which is just kind of crazy and awesome to think about. It was in some of these tools, you can kind of trace their history back. And so that one was in shipyards in Virginia, where it started its life. And, so likely it was helping to forge out pieces for naval ships for like World War I, which is kind of a crazy thing to start thinking about how many things have been made on that hammer. one other really interesting thing about being a blacksmith is that you can, once you have a hammer, an anvil, and tongs, and a forge, you can then go ahead and make more hammers, and you can make more tongs. And if you have something specific that you need in order to make you know, a project, you can generally make the tools that you need to make the thing, or make the tools to make the tool to make the thing. You know, looking back historically, you know, there weren't many, you know, when you think about it, like blacksmithing was the pinnacle of technology. It was like, it was like, if you had a good blacksmith, you know, he made everybody's life better. You know, your farmers having, you know, steel, you know, reaping hooks, and making sure that that's all good, you know, trowels and plows. And, you know, if you're gonna be doing fiber arts and things like that, you know, you needed shears to shear sheep, and who made those? You know, if you were doing stonework, who's making your chisels and who's making your hammers? You know, having a skilled blacksmith, and so much of our technology is built, like, tracing it back to that. And it's really, oh, I was going to talk about Damascus stuff as opposed to going back to the history thing. I'm going to finish the history thing, and then we'll get back to the Damascus. And so it's really an interesting branch of what of blacksmithing and bladesmithing, that you can trace things back. You can look back in history. You can find all of these different things that have survived from, you know, 1,000 years ago, or more, depending, and try to recreate those things. You know, that's a whole different thing. You know, a whole different subset of the craft. And then you can even get to the point of being like, I'm gonna make my own material. And so one thing that I've done, and it was a really cool experience, is that I found an abandoned iron mine in Connecticut. And so I went there, and outside the mouth of the mine, there was all this iron ore. So I went and I collected all this iron ore, brought it back to my shop. I had one of my bladesmithing friends, Jesus, had done quite a bit of smelting, and so we processed this ore, and built a furnace and smelted it. Which, again, we start getting into the science aspect of stuff, because science is cool. And really, like, all of the iron ore that you find is a different form of iron oxide. And so in the furnace, what you're doing is you have all this charcoal that you throw in there, and you get this really hot charcoal fire going, and you start layering the ore and the charcoal. And as that ore drops down, it starts to heat and starts to melt. And since charcoal is just carbon, you have this carbon-rich environment. And carbon, I won't go too much. Okay, so science. Carbon really loves bonding with stuff. It's like one of the most prolific bonding elements that there is. And the thing that it loves bonding to the most is oxygen, right? So you have this iron oxide coming through in this carbon-rich environment, and the carbon is grabbing the oxides off of the iron. And so if you have your proportions right, and have your furnace at the right height for the right type of ore that you're using, at the bottom, you no longer have iron oxide, you just have iron. And and then you can add more carbon to that to then make it steel. Anyways, science is really cool. And there's so much of it in what I do. And so having having that experience of being like, this is what it took to make a thing back then, you know, that's not even counting cutting down the tree to make the charcoal, right? I haven't gone that far yet. Right? I sometimes joke that what I got to do is learn how to nap flint and stone, and make a stone axe to cut down a tree to then make it into charcoal, so that I could then, anyways. So so yeah, there's a lot of different things that you can do, and there's a lot of like different branches that you can go down. Like I was saying earlier, there's no end to the amount of stuff that you can learn and do that is all related to metalworking and to bladesmithing. Back to bladesmithing. The Damascus that I was talking about, it's the thing. There are many ways to create it, right? And what it comes down to is like creating these layers and then exposing those layers so you can see the different designs. And there's different ways to do that. You can just have flat layers that you then cut into, and then you see different ripples, like see the layers as you cut into them. So if I had this and I cut through here, you'd see all these different layers, right? Then there's creating patterns in the end of a bar by forging it in different directions and taking those layers and changing the way they go. You know, so if I had something flat and I forge in my corners, it kind of goes, the layers go like this. Now if I stack that up and crush it down, now they get more extreme. I can cut that bar up, stack it up, and now instead of having straight layers, my layers whoop, 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 make a zigzag. It's called crushed W's. And so as long as you're very careful in your manipulations, you can line those layers up between bars and you can create incredible patterns. Because then you take that bar that has all those different, that different end grain and slice it up into chunks, put those chunks next to each other, and then forge weld them together. And now that's all one piece. And so you have that interesting pattern. I don't have a piece of straight layered Damascus here, but so this is a pattern, a dragon scale pattern that I came up with. And so that was creating that end grain and then welding those pieces together. Now, a thing that I've been doing quite a bit of, and you know, again, kind of coming back to history, is that I've been looking back at these bog finds and seeing these patterns that these Romans did on these on spatha, which is like the Roman longsword, and some of it is just incredible. And some of it is stuff that we haven't really figured out how they did, but they were making all of these little tiles like that end grain, like I was showing you, and stacking them all up and making them sword length, which is a thing that that I've been pursuing quite a bit. And so that's anyways. This was my first. This is a blade that was. This is my first experiment with doing those larger tiles on a sword length. And so what's going on at the edge there is that's twisted bars. And so once you twist a bar, depending on how deeply you cut through it, will change the pattern. And so. And then, you know, this is like this is a really big one. This is one that I just recently did, but creating these tiles. And this is it's a 36-inch long sword. And so one thing that that I've been kind of working on and exploring is how to make those tiles into a long sword length, because it's not a thing that people have really done so much of. Yeah, and I spend a lot of time thinking about these things and how to create different shapes and different patterns. So that's really been my focus recently.
Yeah, just there are some comments coming in the chat. Like, first off, the patterns are stunning, right? And we have a couple student questions.
Well, it all depends on you know, I like having them sharp, but sometimes people want them not sharp, and so I leave it to my customers to tell me whether they want their blades sharpened or not. Yeah. So a fortune fire is, you know, there's a lot of, I mean, the whole part of that show is like taking the thing that you create in the time crunch that they give you, and testing its durability and edge retention and cutting cutting abilities and whatnot. So that was definitely sharp. Both those, the knife and the sword. No, because the material that I'm working with is hot, but and it definitely radiates quite a bit of heat, but it's not that massive an area that is blasting heat towards me. There are definitely times where you want to wear gloves, and but no, in general, I don't have, you don't have to wear like a big reflective suit. That would be, you see that in like foundry work when someone's got like a huge, a ton or so of molten metal that they're pouring, because that's also at a different level of heat than what I generally work with. Well, I'm more excited about like sword making than I am about knife making. And I mean, I still enjoy making knives, but there's something about a sword that that really appeals to me, and I think that part of it again comes back to the like creating those patterns in such long lengths in it. It is a more difficult task than doing it in a small knife, because in that mosaic style where you're creating that end grain and like, so that swirl pattern on the sword, and then in the center of that shorter sword, that kind of like crossing arch, those are all end grains. Those are all separate tiles that get set in. And normally, if you see that kind of mosaic pattern in, like, say, a chef knife, what they're doing is they're stacking those pieces up and then forge welding them this way and then drawing them back out to create that knife. What I'm doing is I'm laying everything out. So what I've kind of discovered by looking back into history is, I've been studying those swords, and everything that I see there is set up with, and this is the thing that I don't actually talk to too many bladesmiths about, so this is my secrets. So everything is set up with like these tiles, and then longer pieces that kind of go between them. So I spent a long time thinking about it, and what it comes down to is, if you can get those together and you can weld those long pieces, if you can weld those to all of your smaller pieces edgewise, now everything is stuck, right? Now nothing can move. And so what I do is I make my rails, the long pieces, which I have as twisted material sometimes, or just straight bars, a little narrower than the tiles. Once those are welded, and you can come down really hard on the tiles are locked in and they need to go somewhere, right? So when you think about, if you had like a thing of Play-Doh and you push down on it, what does it do? It squishes out to the sides, right? So as long as I can encase that material, and again we get to the awesomeness of carbon, right? So as long as I can encase that, the thing that will prevent a weld from happening is if you have oxides in there. So if I encase it and I let it sit and heat up, what happens is steel will outgas carbon, and so you get what's called decarb. And so it's a thing in knife making. Oh, do you have decarb? You got to grind down through that layers. But what's happening is that carbon is outgassing, collecting the oxides that would prevent the metal from welding together. And as I forge it down, those things that were flat kind of come together, and that's how I get my welds. And I'm able to make a sword with 90 tiles in it, which is just crazy to think about. So anyways,
we had another question, like, are there qualifications to be able to buy a sword, or restrictions?
Yeah. So there are only 18 qualifications. And those are each a year. Because you got to be 18.
That was a good
right?
one. Ta-da. Tsh.
Do I travel with swords? I mean, sometimes. So swords in general, you know, it's a legal thing to own. You know, I would, you know, I don't know all the laws of every state, so you know, but generally they're you know, it's legal to own, have in your house. You generally can't walk down the street with one, although I do believe in Texas they just passed open carry of swords. I mean, I believe, not positive. I feel like as I say it that it's not true, but I'm pretty sure that it is. There's a lot of things that I feel like, you know, you say, you're like, that can't be true, but they are. And yeah, I think open carry of swords in Texas. So
we are getting to the end of our time. So before people have to run off, I want to just I want to express multiple forms of gratitude. First off, Jamie, thank you so much for joining us here today. And I'm also incredibly grateful to Jamie, because without him and without this, my head would have been crushed in ages ago. So this thing lets me play with big sticks with my friends. And I'm so glad that I got, I think, what the last helmet that you've made,
yeah,
kind of done with that, right?
it's true. Yeah, absolutely. That was a fun project. It was absolutely a fun project. And I look at things like that and I'm like, oh man, like I could maybe make more. And like, no, don't do it, man. Don't do it.
Well, I now have a piece of history, the last Dragon's Breath helm. So thank you again.